We reference the television series Smallville a lot around here, and there's one Smallville rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor as they discuss each and every episode of the series that ushered in the renaissance of superhero TV. Listen to Always Hold On to Smallville wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On to banner, including Arrow, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, Superman and Lois, and Star Wars. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations, Harrison, New York, aka my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have kids and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah. In the 1950s, George Reeves embodied the Man of Steel in Superman's first television adaptation, from its gritty black and white beginnings to the kid-friendly color years. To this day, an entire generation reveres George as their Superman, while for others, the show remains an overlooked chapter in the character's mythology. On this podcast, we bring everyone together as we break down each episode of Adventures of Superman. Welcome to another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss Season 2, Episode 5, Shot in the Dark, is the host of Always Hold On to Smallville, returning guest, Zach Moore. Welcome back.
Hello there.
So, big picture question. I know you've been rewatching along with us here. How are you feeling about Season 2 so far? I mean, when you were on last year, we talked about your experience with the show generally, but Season 2, how are you feeling?
You know, it's holding up. I expected more of a shift, more into a shift into, I don't know, more childish vibe, maybe. Maybe that's an unfair thing to say. I guess it was, because the episodes so far this season have been, up to this point, have been very in line with what we'd see in season 1. Now, I know the big shift comes when the color episodes start, so we'll see. But these first couple seasons, I did rewatch them a few years ago on DVD. I have the other seasons on DVD in unopened packages, which I will open once you get there in your podcast and keep watching along. But no, I've been pleasantly surprised with the vibe, if you will, of season 2.
Right on. Yeah, this season I feel like very much a bridge between the two eras of the show. It's kind of somewhere in between. So this one, Shot in the Dark, aired October 17th, 1953, written by David Chandler, directed by George Blair. And I'll give my synopsis and then we'll unpack it all. So after getting berated by Perry for missing a Superman scoop, Clark encounters a woman in his office asking for help. She claims she knows he's Superman and produces a picture of Clark changing into his costume that was taken by her nephew, Alan. Clark later explains away the photo as a double exposure, though Jimmy remains suspicious. Turns out Alan took another photo of a man with tulips, Bert, who tried to buy the photo, then ransacked Alan's darkroom and stole the negatives of both photos. Later, at gunpoint, Bert takes the actual photograph of himself from Clark, but Jimmy snatches it and leads him on a chase into the subways. After Superman saves Jimmy's train from a collision orchestrated by Bert's accomplices, the Daily Planet baits them into stealing a mail truck driven by Superman in disguise. Finally, at their hideout, Superman nabs the bad guys, refuses to make a deal with Bert, and uses his X-ray vision to burn the negative of the photo. Bert makes one final attempt to prove Clark is Superman by shooting at Clark, but a lucky silver dollar preserves his secret identity. So that's our roadmap for this episode. Overall impressions?
You know, I really loved the first half of this episode, and I felt like they kind of dropped a lot of interesting things they could have continued, and it became kind of convoluted and not quite as interesting anymore. And that's my overall thoughts. Also, you say X-ray vision. Is that what that was?
Okay, so this is a good question, and that actually points to a question from one of our patrons. Shout out to Mike Thomas, who asks, isn't this the first time we see Superman using heat vision in this series? I don't remember him using it in the first season. We don't see beams or lasers, but I'm assuming it's heat vision he's using in this episode. I could be mistaken, and if anyone knows anything to the contrary, let me know, and I'm sure you will. But my understanding is I think at this point in time, I think that X-ray vision was used kind of as a precursor to what would become heat vision. Like he could use his X-ray vision to ignite. And that's what I think is happening here. I don't think it's a matter of, they're not showing heat beams. I think it's that the X-rays are causing that ignition, is my understanding. I could be wrong.
Well, you would know better than me, but heat vision hadn't even been invented yet, right? But that was a later power.
Yes, I don't know exactly when it comes into play. I need to double check that, but
look that up. Yeah,
but yeah. So I really think this is X-ray vision functioning in that capacity.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting, and that's fine, I guess. Now I know that shout out to our mutual friend Rob O'Connor from the All Star Superfan podcast. This has come up a couple of times in conversations that we've had. But if there was like one power you're going to take away from Superman, I know he's often said heat vision, and I think I agree with him because it's like, dude, you got so many powers already. Like, do you need an offensive power? And like so many plots are made so much easier when you just stand over here and neutralize certain things. So anyway, that X-ray heat conversation made me think of that. But I kind of like that if he didn't have heat vision, he could still do certain things with this X-ray vision, like set off a burglar alarm or incinerate the negatives inside of a case.
Yeah, well, that's actually a good point. And I kind of have to agree with that because when you look at the other powers, they're all kind of enhancements of abilities you already have, right? Super speed. So he's faster or, X-ray vision is already pushing it, but it's just like enhanced sight, essentially. Super hearing, right? But beams of heat out of your eyes is really just kind of its own thing. Even super breath, it's like you can blow, right? But like now this is an enhanced version of that. So yeah, I don't know. If you had to sacrifice one and you were trying to keep it as believable as possible, I get that.
Yeah, if you're trying to like start Superman from scratch, you need a more depowered Superman. I'm like, okay, well, maybe he can just leap tall buildings in a single bound. No, he's got to fly. You can't take away flying at this point because that's a thing. You can take away heat vision. And I say this as someone who Heat is one of my favorite episodes of Smallville, like legit A+ episode to me. Maybe it's because I was a teenager at the time and it spoke to me in a lot of ways. But and I love what the show did with the heat vision. But that's my piece about it. And I just thought that was interesting because I know that chronologically this show, as I understand it, came out before the heat vision. And so when he was burning things up with his eyes, I had a similar question to your patron. So thanks for asking that.
Yeah, no, that was a great question. But yeah, I mean, my understanding and look, my pre-crisis comic book reading, I've checked off a lot in recent years, but there's still a lot that I haven't gotten through. But my understanding is I do think that's how X-ray vision functioned for a period of time before proper heat vision was introduced. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting you say convoluted. I had a similar reaction to this episode. Because a lot of time, look, I'm doing these episode by episode and I'll watch it and I'll take my notes. And usually it's a pretty kind of like simple process. But for this one, when I got done watching it the first time, because sometimes I'll watch them twice, sometimes I'll just do them once. But I finished this one, I was like, there was a lot. There was a lot going on in this episode. And that's not necessarily a negative, but it was just, I feel like the rhythm of this one was a little bit different. And there were just a lot of turns. I also think this one was a little odd because you look at the first couple of scenes with Perry and Clark, and then Perry and Harriet Harper, and I will get into it, but it's like you could lift those two scenes right out of the episode and it changes nothing. So I feel like the rhythm was just a little different in this one.
That's unfortunate because I really loved those scenes. That's a great point. I got to a point where I was like, is Lois even in this episode? Because I feel like, wasn't there a couple episodes of the first season that Lois was not in?
Yeah. And I'll be honest, big picture, this is one of my biggest frustrations with this episode. And I promise the audience, I don't want to keep harping on this because we have our change in Lois in terms of both performer as well as the writing and just the overall depiction. She's been softened. She's more feminine, whatever. But this one was particularly frustrating, just the way that she's portrayed. I feel like Jimmy's role in this episode, being suspicious of Clark's identity, like I liked seeing Jimmy and Clark in those scenes together, but I feel like it probably should have been Lois. And I feel like Lois, deeper into the episode, is just in the way, and she knows she's in the way, and I don't like that vibe.
She's enjoying being in the way. Yeah.
I mean, right? Like it really kind of bugged me, man.
And it's not an actress thing. It's a writing thing, right? They've had a conscious choice. And, let's just talk about it now, right? Noelle Nils, my first episode on the podcast in season 2. I liked her in season 2. I haven't, this is like the use of her here is probably the one, the first time I'm like, oh, that was kind of lame. But other than that, I thought she was pretty solid with not a different a gear than Lois in season one, but nothing I was like, oh, well, what a downgrade, right? And I think literally every single person you had on the podcast was like, well, I like Phyllis Coates, but no offense to Noelle Neal. We've all said it exactly like that too, because she's this matronly figure of the Superman, mythos, right? And carry the torch of that character for a long time. And I really like the fact that, if nothing else, like, she played Lois Lane in the serials, and they're like, well, let's get her back for this. I'm like, that's brilliant. I think all recasting should happen that way. Like in the MCU, I'm like, well, we lost Ed Norton. Let's call Eric Bana. Let's see what he's up to. Or, oh, John Hurt died. Let's call Sam Elliott. Maybe he can come back and play Thunderbolt Ross. Like, these are, I really like that thinking. And I don't think that ever happens. And this is maybe the only case of it, but like, I don't know. I like that kind of continuity of things and the justification of nothing else. The fact that she played Lois Lane before and they needed a Lois Lane immediately, going to her makes perfect sense. And she is a good Lois Lane. Right? Obviously she people enjoyed her for years, and it's no slight to her that we liked Phyllis Coates so much,
Yeah.
And I also like the fact that Phyllis Coates, like, it wasn't like she didn't like the show when she left and she went to pursue bigger things. It wasn't that. It's that they, as I've learning more about the show, they filmed that whole first season before they even sold the show. So she had moved on to other things by the time the show started again. It wasn't, she was like, I'm not doing this anymore. Right. So it's not one of those situations. It was just, hey, that's the way it is. So that's the way I feel about it. We have our preferences about it, but you are right. I think this is the first episode where I'm like, yeah, Lois, I don't know. Yeah, it didn't. All the pieces didn't quite fit together here as well as they could have.
Well said. I don't disagree with any of that. And in fairness, too, we recognize that Lois was being depicted in the comic books in a certain way at this time as well. I think akin to what we see. So it's not like this was an outlier per se. I think it's particularly tough coming off of season one. But yeah, I mean, it's not a knock on the actress. It really is. I think just largely the material and just the direction that the character was taken in. But this episode in particular really kind of annoyed me. But the other big picture thing with this, oh man, I couldn't stop laughing. Just the notion, you have this woman and her nephew who has this photo of Clark changing into Superman. And it's this great scene where she comes into Clark's office and Jimmy's there and she's like, Superman, I need your help. And he's like, Superman, you must be mixed up. And what's he going to do in this situation? And all I could think of was, if this lady and her nephew are so lucky that this is season 2 Clark and not season 1 Clark, because if this had been season 1, those two would have been putting on their winter coats and packing a bag for a one-way trip to the cabin, a la the stolen costume.
Don't worry, I'll come back.
Don't try to climb down.
He would have come back. It's Superman. Okay. This did feel like they like, hey, that was a really successful idea. Let's try that again. And it was like, it didn't work quite the same. Because even the bad guy at the end kind of figures it out, and we'll talk it all through. But it's like, yeah, you did this kind of idea much better last time.
Well, that's the funny thing too. And, you and I both know, I know we've experienced this with the various Superman media we've consumed, where sometimes your memory kind of plays tricks on you. Like for this one, I definitely thought that the photo and the secret identity danger was a larger part of this, but it's dealt with pretty quickly. Although again, Jimmy continues to make his digs and Clark still needs to get that original negative back. And then, like we said, the Bert figures it. So it's not like it goes away, but I definitely, in my memory of this episode, I thought it was a lot more about the secret identity aspect.
Well, we got about halfway through. I'm like, oh, I guess they resolved it. I'm like, I literally thought they resolved it. And then it comes back in at the end. I'm like, oh, I guess they had. Okay. But that's the point of like the pacing, the stakes, the pieces coming together. If you lose such an integral like hook like that, then you've dropped the ball somewhere along the way. So those are my overall thoughts. A good jumping off point though for an idea for an episode. So good on him there.
Yes. By the way, speaking of jumping off points for ideas, I feel like there's a lost Silver Age comic book story somewhere in the ether of like the village who knew Superman's secret, right? Like just this notion that every time someone figures out his identity, enemy or ally,
he just takes them.
He takes them to the cab. But you think about in an instance like this, if he hadn't been able to dissuade them of this notion that that he's Superman. It's like, what would he have done with this nephew and his aunt? It's like, I don't know. Maybe he would have taken them to the cabin. But then you've got a kid. He needs to be educated. Why you need a teacher? What are you going to do? And then at a certain point, you just think about the maintenance of this, right? He's got to keep feeding them, just a lot of upkeep. It becomes it becomes like this little village. Like, I don't know. Especially now, having spent more time in the Silver Age of comics, you could see that as a cover, like the village who knew Superman's secret.
I see Clark Kent flying over them. Hey, Mr. Kent. Hey, son. You know, and I see it now. It's amazing. Hey, any artists out there, make that cover happen for us. But that would be a zany. How many issues are like? I love like these out of context covers where he's like, him and Lois are in space and he like breaks her air tube, or he's standing above the Justice League. He's all killed. I'm like, what was going on then? Like, all props to them for just doing anything that came to mind. So
I know they really grabbed your attention right off the newsstand. It's really something. So a quick guest star breakdown. We have Vera Marsh as Harriet Harper, the daffy aunt who kicks things off as she shows up at the Daily Planet. We have Bill Gray as Alan Harper. I don't know if you ever watched any 2.5 Men, but that's the name of John Cryer's character on that show.
That's when it sounded familiar. Yeah.
I watched all 12 seasons of that show.
No, I did not know that.
There's no rewatch podcast in my future.
Okay.
But I did. I watched it. So Alan Harper, very familiar name. This young actor would go on to star in 200 episodes of Father Knows Best.
Wow, was he a father, or was he was not the titular father of the new Best?
No, not that I know, but that's as far as my IMDbing
wow,
went.
200 episodes of that. Wow, what are you, Smallville over here?
I know.
Goodness gracious.
John Eldridge as Bert, the Tulip Man. It's a very familiar face for Adventures of Superman fans because he was Canby in Crime Wave at the end of season 1.
Okay, this guy looks super familiar. Now I know why. I was like, surely he's been on the show before, and there it is. They recycle a lot of actors as a lot of similar characters. See, that's the problem. These characters are too similar, and they recycle the actors. Mix it up a little bit, show.
Well, on that note, so then, there are the two accomplices, Hank and Bill. So Alan Lee played Bill, and then Frank Richards played Hank, and he was one of the guys in Night of Terror. And then he comes back for another episode in season 5 as a different character. And John Eldridge as Bert, he also will come back in season 4 and season 6 as different characters.
Hey, I get it, right? You work with people, you want to work with them again? Sure. But like mix it up some, right? Smallville, right? Got a shout out. I've had some fun saying like, is this the same character? Right? Because like when there's only some characters you can say this for because people get killed off and stuff. But the chief from Battlestar Galactica, who's Aaron Douglas. Yes, that's the actor's name. He's in season 1 as a sheriff who does some shady stuff. And then I don't think he dies at the end. No, he does. No, I'm sorry. He's the red herring. You think he's the sheriff doing shady stuff. It's a different sheriff or deputy, whatever. You guys know what I'm saying. Anyway, he's a law enforcement officer in the first season of Smallville. He comes back in season 7. The actor comes back. It's like this mercenary guy. I'm like, that could have totally been the same guy. Like, I think on that episode, we had this whole fan theory of like, oh yeah, he saw how many meteor freaks are infesting the town. And he's like, I'm going to hunt some people down. Anyway, you would never do that in the 50s, but you would do it in 2001. So it's an opportunity there. But most of the times the people played radically different characters. But I get it. It's a different era. It's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially, again, like we're consuming this in a different way than it was ever intended. Yes. And we're binging them and we're analyzing them in this way. So no one
was ever supposed to watch these more than once.
Filmmakers and movie fans alike should be sure to attend these film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and Round Reel in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Take it from an alum of 2 of them. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and under new ownership since 2020, Moose sells a wide selection of comics from every publisher and time period, along with action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. All right, let's launch into our scene by scene breakdown here. The opening I found very unusual for this episode. We open on a shot of him flying and then a very long, lingering pan up the Daily Planet building.
I can only assume that was to establish that he lands back there and changes, which is fun because I could infer this watching more of the episode, what they were maybe trying to say. But why don't we see that? Like, why don't we see George Reeves land in the Superman costume and start to change? Why don't we see the inciting incident of this plot? We don't even need to see the kid take the picture. We just need to see the event happen. And that could okay. You think you're just getting a cool day in the life of Superman, but then they play out some more later. That's what I would have. And it's not a special effects thing. They totally could have done that. And that's what's cool about this episode. Very rarely in the show do we see the in-between kind of Clark and Superman. We see that a couple times here.
Yeah, that was cool for sure. But no, I think that helps account for it, or they were just short on time and they need a few extra seconds to fill. But I know I said these first couple of scenes with Perry, look, plot wise, you could lift them out. I mean, you could just start this episode with Harriet barging into Clark's office and you don't lose anything. But these Perry scenes I thought were great, where Clark and Perry bump into each other. Clark's coming out of the storage closet. And at first, Perry feigns an apology, but then quickly bites Clark's head off. And Clark's like, I ran out of paper. And Perry's like, I wish you would. Would what? Run out of paper. This one. Perry's mad because Superman saved 10 people from a burning building and Perry had to read about it in other papers. These papers move fast because this only happened a half hour ago, but they've already got their editions out on the street.
Two things on this. I love how typical George Reeves Clark, he's like, yes, I heard about that. Yes. It's like, dude, what are you doing? Just advertising your Superman. Also, hey, I've started to see a little more in season 2 of like this meek Clark people are always telling us he is. Because like in the Jet Ace episode, the previous episode, right? He's like, oh my God, he really is in danger. I can't stand it. And he leaves the room to go be Superman. And people are like, what a coward. When in fact, he's going to be Superman. This episode, when he bumps into Perry, he's like, oh, I'm sorry, Chief. I'm like, hey, look at that. Season 1 Clark would never.
Yeah, I know. No, it's true. And the Jet Ace, that's a great example. And that came up when we did that. And yeah, like I do appreciate those instances because it does at least help account for this view that so many of them seem to have and the cracks that they make at his expense. And along those lines of his responses to Perry when, again, Perry's berating him, like, why didn't you get the story? And Clark's like, well, I sort of had my hands full. It's again, but another one of these lines where it's like, man, you're just asking for it. It's like, you're just throwing it in their face.
There's no surprise somebody shows up in 5 minutes and says, hey, Superman.
I know, but it's one of those things where it's a fascinating dynamic. He's the most powerful man in the world. Right. But in this guise, like he's just taking this verbal thrashing from Perry White.
It's fun. That's the fun of the character, the fun of the secret identities. And that's so much of the charm that George Reeves brings to it. And hey, I am Christopher Reeve guy through and through. And I love his goofy Clark and all that. And I think Brandon Routh is probably the more calibrated, believable version of that Clark if we're doing that thing. But I got to say, man, rewatching these shows and I'm really loving George Reeves as both characters, but Clark especially for just everything, just not just the things he says, but the way he says them in these situations is so charming.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, it was a humorous interaction between the two of them in the hallway. And then we follow Perry into his office and he's followed by this, again, I think Daffy is the word to describe her. She's a little cookie, this Harriet Harper. And the setup for this was so odd to me because first of all, Perry's talking to himself, continuing to be annoyed with Clark. And she's just like, I beg your pardon. I didn't hear you. Right. It's a little funny jumping off point, but then she's like, you can't be, you just can't be. And she has the photo. She's mistaken him for Clark. Seemingly.
Yeah, I guess that plays in her just being kind of absent-minded and weird. Like she's a few light bulb short of a lamp or whatever I don't know. This is the character they have presented to us. And she's quirky, absent-minded. She's mixing up phrases and words. So sure, this is all just a setup to get us to where we are. But it does give us a couple more great Perry moments, right?
I mean, I had to write this down where she's like, you can't be, you just can't be. And he goes, no truer words were ever spoken, madam, as he pushes her out the office. It was great. I thought it was great. And here's the thing. I know I said these lift right out and they do, but I do like that there's this connection point where under normal circumstances, it's very clear like Perry would have just sent her away, but because he's annoyed with Clark,
no, he deserves it.
He deserves it. So he sends her Clark's way. So it's like, oh, okay, this ties together with what we've seen. So it was humorous. It gave John Hamilton something to do. It established this woman very clearly. So
yeah. These are Perry's only scenes, right?
Yeah.
Wow. Hey, are you coming around on him as Perry White? I think we were talking about it when the show started. I was like, these are the prototypical versions of these characters. And you're like, yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't know. I think he's great as Perry White.
He's great.
He's no Lane Smith. No one is. But
that's the thing. I like the sweet spot for me. I do like more of a paternal side, seeing more layers of Perry. I like when Perry has more components to him as opposed to that gruff barking. But the show has given us that on occasion. I mean, I feel like the moments so far in our rewatch, they're kind of few and far between, but they are there. Mm-hmm. I mean, last week's episode with Jet Ace, where he's worried about his nephew, that was something, and even going back to season 1, that No Holds Barred episode where he picks up on Clark maybe being a little bit jealous about Lois and the wrestler. So it's like there are these moments where, okay, you see a little bit of that side to him. So I appreciate that, but so I like him a lot. It's still just not my ideal version of Perry.
Mm-hmm. Fair.
But it's not a knock on the actor, certainly.
I got to say, rewatching, because I had seen some of these before, and some of these I remember, and some of them I don't. Rewatching Jet Ace, I was like, his nephew, the pilot, like Superman Returns. What are you doing? I thought you were original.
I know. Adventures of Superman is the blueprint. There you go.
There it is.
So this next scene in Clark's office, I loved, even though, again, I do feel like a lot of Jimmy's material here could and may arguably should have gone to Lois, but I like this dynamic between Clark and Jimmy, where Clark's reading an article that Jimmy has written, and Clark's like, oh, this is terrible for me. That is, you're going to put me out of a job. And, you see the pride that Jimmy feels, and he's relieved. And I just like that dynamic. And even just, I don't know, I doubt this was written, but whether this was Jack Larson's choice or direction he was given, but just kind of his posture as he was sitting on the chair, like it was just so like natural and lived in. I really like that vibe between them.
Oh, I do too. That the whole big brother aspect of Clark, and it shows that Jimmy is not just he becomes one, right? But he's not just some comic relief silly character. He's capable, and Clark's giving him the compliment as a mentor would to a mentee in the situation, and that's their vibe, and that's the best vibe between the two of them.
Yeah, well, that's the thing with this episode, and I think this is why I keep coming back to this idea of I kept feeling like it should have been Lois instead of Jimmy, because did you feel like Jimmy was savvier in this than you would expect from this incarnation of the character, especially all those little digs at Clark throughout the episode?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, definitely. This era of the show, right? He's more in track because he wasn't all comic relief for a while until the color years, right? So in the black and white years, he was a more, I don't know if 3-dimensional is the right word, but yeah, I do like how he didn't immediately buy the really BS excuses Clark was giving everyone.
I know. So this woman comes in, we were talking about this before, but she's just like, you must help me, Superman. She keeps addressing him as Superman. He's like, Superman, you must be mixed up. And that's where, if there was ever a shade of season 1 Clark, I feel like it was yes. bubbling under the surface there.
Yeah.
Yeah. What'd you think about his reaction and just kind of the way Clark navigated this situation? Because the woman produces the photo and you see Clark mid-change into Superman. So, the shirt's coming off and you see the top of his costume underneath.
Yeah. It's a classic like shirt rip moment you see in the comic book, and we don't really get those in the George Reeves shows. That's why it was so interesting to see it. He really overplayed like doth protest too much, I think is the term from Shakespeare. And it's like, dude, like you need to be like, me, everybody knows I'm not Superman. You need to really you need to play that down, man. You don't play about this. Like, you don't get all mad at her.
True. But I don't know. This tactic here was it was just interesting to me when he says, well, there must be some explanation, but he doesn't have one.
Yeah, doesn't have one.
But I think about, I think if I were in some kind of situation, if you were, it's like, would that fly if you were like, quote unquote, caught and you were just, well, there has to be some explanation. That's it.
Hey, you don't paint yourself in the corner.
True.
You just say, you hope for a possibility will come up, and fortunately it does. Unfortunately for him, though, Jimmy is there, and he's going to tag along for this explanation.
I know. And he asked, "Do you mind if I come along?" He's like, "No, of course not." And, clearly, he would
always
prefer
great
Jimmy.
to have you, Jim. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the this sarcastic side of Clark. Yeah,
he's so good as Clark. Like it's his constant frustration is so interesting with how brazen he is with talking about. Well, I'd have to be Superman to do that, Lois. Right? Like I don't get how those correlate, but I think of the term inconsistency of character is character, and that is him. Like you're just going around talking about how you know this could do that, and then you get really frustrated and mad at people when they might really start to think you might be Superman. I don't know. He just when people accuse Clark Kent of being like a two-dimensional character, but like I don't know, man. Like I love watching this guy as this character.
I agree, and you're right. The frustration and the brazenness, that combo. Never seen that in any other depiction.
No. I mean, we're so used to years on Smallville where it's like, Clark, how the hell did you get in here? I don't know.
Just lucky, I guess.
And sometimes no response.
It would be like if on Smallville, Clark had said to Lana or to Chloe, "I don't know, I must be a meteor freak." like just
like, whoa.
Right in their face. Yeah. So amazing.
Oh man.
So we go to the Harper apartment. And another great exchange where the little boy, I mean, this kid seems like he's got a good head on his shoulders. The aunt is a little out there, but he's got a good head on his shoulders. He's like, "Great, you brought Superman." And he's like, "There seems to be a difference of opinion on that one." So I like that exchange. And his dark room has been ransacked. We'll get
his
more.
Dark room. This 11-year-old kid has a dark room in the 1950s apartment.
Well, not only that, look, we'll learn this in just a minute here where we get more exposition, but not only did he take a picture of Clark, but he also took a picture of this other guy, Bert, the man with the tulips, who chased him down and offered him, eventually, through multiple offers, $1,000 for the photo. And this kid refused it because he wanted to enter the photo into the state contest, which, okay, fine. They give a reason for it. I can't knock it. But like $1,000 for a little kid at that time, it's like...
Does that state contest pay $1,000? I think not.
Unless it was like you win this contest, you get a free ride to school or something. I mean, I don't know.
Sure.
But otherwise, it feels like, sell the photo, kid. What are you doing?
Yeah, I would have.
Exactly. Well, it's especially fitting that you're here because I know, in your non-podcasting and, photographer, videographer. So I want to ask you about this because we have a couple little bits of business here, but the dark room's been ransacked and... but at this point, Alan explains that he was out taking photos at night with his infrared bulb. He saw a figure. He didn't really know what he was photographing until he developed it. But he talks about taking a couple of photos. And this is where Clark's strategy of there must be an explanation pays off because one presents itself seemingly. Mm-hmm. He's like, "Oh, you took more than one photo?" And so,
well, that explains it then. Yes.
Yes. So this whole theory that Clark posits this kid forgot to wind the film and that it caused a double exposure, that essentially this kid photographed Superman and then Clark separately in the exact same position and it caused this double exposure. Is that track technically?
Well, technically on those kind of cameras, yes, because that's how you get all those classic, like quote unquote ghost photos and things in the past or those like, but usually there's a little bit of transparency, right? Because it's like you're writing an image, so to speak, on the film, and then you're writing another image on top of that same piece of film, and that's how it works. So theoretically, yeah, but for them to be in the exact spot at that same time, but the key is, I guess, he doesn't have the other picture. I don't know. Like, I was more dubious about the infrared bulb. It's like someone's gonna hear that. He's like, "Oh, nobody even knows, right?" I don't know about that. I don't know about the tech. I got to research some 1950s cameras now, but these infrared bulbs, because that would be some amazing technology to be able to take something in presumably darkness and then have no one able to know you're there. But the double exposure thing, it's clever. It's a clever explanation that he just rattles off. The key is when you're BSing people, you got to act like you know exactly what you're talking about. And they're like, "Well, I don't know. This guy seems like an expert, so I'm gonna trust him." Right. And that's what Clark did.
And this kid, my disappointment is that the kid just fell in line with this. I wanted the kid to be like, no, I didn't forget to wind the film back just to see what Clark would have come back with. But no, he goes along with it. And then Clark's like, I smell smoke out in the hallway. And so he sends them out. He of course has already deduced that there's a fire coming from the dark room, and he calms it with his hand. Apparently, he seems to kind of dampen it just with his, which again makes sense with his powers. But it was just kind of interesting the way they did it. Like it really looked like he like literally like just kind of patted down or like calmed down the flame.
So, we talked about the heat vision off the top here, and because we see non-heat vision, X-ray vision a couple of times later in this episode, thinking back, I was like, wait, did he start this fire? But it was already there from when the last guy broke in. Okay. He's not a complete arsonist.
Although I know that is actually a good, that hadn't crossed my mind, but that's a good question. And we're not in the era yet of super breath, because this came up last week too with Jet Ace, with that cabin engulfed in flames. Like you expect him to like blow it out, but no, there's none of that.
Well, it's so like the hook of this episode being like the whole someone's captured you as Superman on film or on a picture, like like that's a great story trope for Superman. Like, and Smallville had similar things like that, right? What are we gonna do with this picture video? Where are we gonna get around this, right? And so Clark's solution here is like, well, I'm just gonna throw this picture in that fire and stamp it out, and then he's got to get the negatives next, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Lois and Clark as well did the same type of thing with those genius kids, right? Who had been souped up.
Oh, the smart kids, yeah,
smart kids, right? The same setup here. So, wait, actually, now that we're talking about it more, yeah, did he set that fire in the dark room?
I don't know. That's what I'm saying. I don't know.
Because it's like, I don't know. Because, I mean, you get the sense that Alan found the dark room ransacked very recently. But, I mean, I don't know. If there had been a fire, would they not have? I mean, unless like just happened.
Because he was like, do you smell that burning? They'd be like, yeah, this fire right here, right? I don't know. The only reason I'm questioning it is because I saw him light things on fire the rest of the
I know.
the rest of the episode.
We've now just, equated that as his go-to move. Like, that's just what he does. But they reconvene in the living room, and this is where we get more of the backstory about how he also took the... So that's the thing. The setup of this is like, there's a photo of Clark changing into Superman, but really what sends Harriet into his office isn't, I'm going to expose you, you're Superman. It's like, I need help, right? Because of this other photo. He took the photo of this guy. He wanted to buy it. He ransacked the dark room. And so on. I feel like Clark and Jimmy have a bit of fun at Harriet's expense here, and kind of her kind of limited mental faculties. Oh, it's not the best color on them.
Jimmy did make me kind of laugh though. He's like, yeah, basic psychology. We could use some of that around here. I was like,
I know,
because the lady is clearly she's mixing up words, and the proof is in the pudding, and I have the pudding. Oh, I mean the proof. So she's it's there. Look, this is that character at that time. This is comedy. It's fun. Hey, for 1950s comedy, it's fine. That's who this character is. But yeah, they do have some fun. They have a couple of jabs at her, but without her even clocking what they're saying, I guess is the real problem.
No, I mean, they're not, I know, but they're not, they're not overtly or unnecessarily cruel. And there are some funny bits. I mean, Jimmy says something to the effect of like, by the time this is done, I'll be Superman. And then Clark shakes his hand, and like they have that whole little bit. Yeah. Oh, and then at the end where she's like, tomorrow's another day. And Jimmy goes, yeah, and tomorrow and the day after is too. So
she's like, oh, he's right. But through all this, they find the second picture, even though the guy broke in to steal it, he couldn't find it in the darkroom because Alan Harper had thrown it in the trash can. Who puts valuable things in the trash can? No one. I don't know. That's pretty smart, right? Gotta hide it somewhere.
This is a very resourceful young kid. He's out in the middle of the night taking these photos with an infrared bulb that escape even Superman senses. He knows enough to hide the photo in the waste paper basket. He's so principled about winning this contest, he won't take $1,000 for this photo. I mean, this is Alan Harper, quite the young man here.
Speaking of, we're like, hey, you're a photographer. What do you think of this? Hey, shouldn't Jimmy know about this? Isn't he a photographer?
Shouldn't
he know about double exposure?
But that's the thing. Like on this show, he's really presented more as a cub
reporter. Like a cub reporter. Yeah, that was my question, because I always forget. Like on Lois and Clark, I'm like, was Michael Landis ever a photographer? I know that Justin Whalen was. I might have seen Michael Landis with a camera once. But it's just, I don't know.
I know and even going back to that earlier scene with Clark and Jimmy, it's like he had written an article about. So it's really more this cub reporter angle. I know, as much as we always think of Jimmy as having the camera, and I love, again, like the George Reeves in this really is great, because he's this quick throwaway line about whether or not the guy who broke in got the negative of his photo as well. And the guy's like, yeah, he probably did. He's like, oh, it's okay. It doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't matter now.
Yeah.
See,
So
that's what you got to do. That's what that. See, he's like, okay, well, I'm going to just say that's nothing, even though it's like, oh no, that's really important. I got to get that, which is his driving force more so than the other problem. Probably this Clark.
yeah, I don't know that he's all that concerned about the tulip man.
Man.
I don't think he's all that concerned. So we go back to the Daily Planet. The kid entrusts Clark with the photo, and we go back to the Daily Planet, and that's where Lois runs into them. And you gotta love Clark's response when Lois shows up. Oh no.
Yeah, that's the problem there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they were more equals before, and now it's like, oh, she's a nuisance, right?
Yeah. It's also this weird thing too, where I mean, the show, I know we'll get into episodes in the color years. Like I know there's one, because I have seen this one before, where Lois, it's a dream episode and she dreams that she and Superman are getting married. I mean, the show never does. It's not Lois and Clark. We don't get a full on romance, but that idea of them in that capacity is at least touched on. But it's just kind of interesting, because it's like, I feel like this Lois maybe is more built for that, but there was definitely more friction, more chemistry, more heat in the first season between the two of them.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So we get an
I thought like, oh, is this her only scene? Because like, oh, hey, what are you guys up to? Oh, I can't tell you, Lois. And they leave. I'm like, okay, good. Check. Lois appeared in this episode, and I thought, okay, she has no story function here. This will be it for her. But she keeps popping up.
I know that would have been. I know we would have been like, oh, they barely used her in this one, but at least it wouldn't have been as grating as what we ended up getting. But in Clark's office, he hides the photo.
Well, the photo of the who we learned is Bert with tulips, because the aunt referred to him as the tulip man, or him as the tulip man, in front of a poster for a show that has a specific date on it, which will come in handy later.
Yes, it will. When they were looking at that photo originally at the apartment, I love how Harriet was like, oh, he also took a photo of me. Do you want to see it? And I was expecting Clark to have a far harsher response, but he's just like, oh, maybe another time, or something gentle. But
they were nice about it. They're like, this lady.
And then
so he took this in the dark without the guy knowing. He's like 2 feet away from it.
I don't know. Apparently,
infrared bulb is amazing technology. I'm going to go get myself an infrared bulb after this, Anthony. Let me tell you.
Go for it. Well, but in defense of the show, it's like this kid was close enough because Bert realized and tracked him down. So
that's true. Superman is an idiot though, because you're super hearing, man.
I know. Well, like I always say when we talk about this, and this just came up, we did the man who could read minds, and Clark, or Superman, knows all about the Tip Top Club in Metropolis. And I'm like, what private life does this guy have? Like, he's got there's this whole other world we're not seeing. So who knows what's going through his mind? He's not worried about who's taking his picture.
I believe this Clark would have a private life, right? This guy, like he is living life to the fullest,
I agree. Look, you look at like Lois and Clark, and we got to see that. He's playing basketball on the weekends.
Yeah, he's hanging out with Bo Jackson and Phil Mickelson.
He's just hanging out. But this Clark, I feel like this Clark is living it up, and I'm here for it. But so Bert comes in with a gun. And
because Clark hid the thing under like what the under his desk, like mat or whatever, right?
Uh-huh.
Right there.
Right there. I love though. I mean, I don't know, just in terms of the morality of all, what do you make of the fact that Clark says to him, he's like, are you sure you don't want to make a trade?
I love it. I totally believe this Clark would trade. He's like, I'll figure this out later. Priority one is me getting the evidence of me as Superman back, and then I'll figure it out. I absolutely believe that he would have made that trade.
I do too. I was fine with that. But Jimmy gums up the works here. So the guy says, like, I looked through the other photos. He's not willing to make this deal. But Clark is going to give him the photo. We'll learn later, his plan is to, I guess, follow him back. But Jimmy gums up the works here. He comes in and he snatches the photo and he just makes a break for it.
So you don't think Clark saw Jimmy coming in?
No.
That's the only wrinkle in the plan of he's saying like, oh yeah, he would have made the trade. Like he saw Jimmy walking in and he was trying to stall.
I mean,
so one of them get the photo, but from what unfolds from here, it doesn't seem that way because Clark's like, I was gonna follow him or something. So, yeah. See, and this is where, Jimmy snatches away from them, and this is where the episode really starts to kind of get not as interesting to me because we get about 5 minutes of stock footage of trains, the subway trains.
There's a lot from the New York City subway, according to IMDb trivia. But yeah, that's a bit, I know it definitely, this episode definitely takes a turn here where you get this, and it gets almost farcical because Jimmy makes off with it. Bert chases him. Clark runs after them, and then they pass by Lois, and then here's another out for Lois. She could have seen them and been like, oh, these guys, and like walked away. But it's like, no, she chased after them as well.
I thought the guy was going to take Lois hostage or something, which I would have been like, it would give her something to do, but then I don't want her to always be a damsel. I just like, I don't know. There's so many avenues of like ins or outs they could have used for her, and they chose the least interesting one.
Yes. But we then go to the subway, and Jimmy makes it onto the train, and the doors close, and Bert didn't get there in time. And he then checks in with one of his accomplices here, and Clark is standing next to the phone booth and is using his super hearing to eavesdrop on this. But essentially, the accomplice says that they're going to cause a train wreck and use that to get the photo from Jimmy. And of course, Clark hears this, and this is probably the point where I was most frustrated with Lois and with the episode, because Clark is going to go after Bert, and then Lois shows up, and she's like, oh, like wherever you go, I go, and there must be something going on. And he just turns and leaves with her. And I don't want to harp on this, but it's just like, again, her kind of demeanor in this, like I said at the top, it just feels like she knows she's kind of in the way and doesn't seem to appreciate the weight of what's going on. I mean, she doesn't have the information, so how could she? It just feels like such a, I don't know, could Clark have not clued her in on some of this and said, no, we need to follow that guy?
That's the thing. Like, he's like, that guy's going to, there's another way he could have said like, oh, well, I'm on a hot lead. Come with me and we'll share the byline and we'll get on it, just to kind of, don't let her derail your entire objective here. Right. And that's because they see her as like a nuisance in this episode. Like, well, I guess I got to walk you back to the office because that seems to be what they're doing instead of him following the bad guy.
That's the thing. So not all of this is on Lois. I mean, I feel like from Clark's perspective too, it's like there is some kind of middle ground here. I don't know. I mean, I know
he's having to spend enough life. He's under a lot of stress.
That's true.
Okay. This episode.
Well, that's true, because it's like he has to preserve his identity generally. But then there's this added layer of, oh, I've also got to get this negative back. So, all right, fair enough.
But these are, and that's why this show is fun, because there's these little things you would never see. I know we have said that you see versions of this in other stories, but it's usually just this little component of this. Stories like the stolen costume, stories like this. Oh my God, someone got a picture of me as Superman, right? That's fun little small scale stuff that you don't really see anymore. Even in the modern shows, they've kind of like, we got to have world-ending stakes and nothing's episodic and you can't have a nice little tight adventure. So I respect the concept, you know?
That's a good point. And even just how the times have changed. I mean, such a big part of the stolen costume was about the bad guys just figuring out who lived in the apartment that the costume was found. It's like, you think about that episode today, it'd be like 2 seconds. So, but that was a whole piece. So then we see Hank and Bill, Bert's associates. They get on board the local train. They knock out the conductor. They rig it to be a runaway train. And they call Bert and they say, you ever hear of a local catching up with an express? This one's gonna, right? So the plan is afoot. They've put this plan into motion to cause this wreck. And then we catch up with Clark and Lois on the street as they pass by Dick's Meat Market. There you go. That's the name of the place.
Noted.
And this is when we get another. I mean, yeah, Clark is really quite the quite the arsonist in this episode, using his X-ray vision to short circuit the alarm outside there on the street.
I've seen Clark on Smallville do that a lot of times. That's how he gets out of jail in Heat, right? He sits, but it's like this. No, this is just his X-ray vision. Okay, fine. If you say so, show.
But that diverts Lois and allows him to change into Superman and head down into the subway. Can you please explain to me, what does he do to stop this subway? He rips up track. What is he doing?
Well, if you've seen Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, Anthony, you would know that all you got to do is step on the subway. It's clearly an electric train. And you just step on, you disrupt the electricity, and that slows the train. I was wondering how they were going to do this. I was actually like, oh, you actually did Superman saving a subway. This will be exciting. And they kind of made it not as exciting as it could have been. I don't know. They don't have a lot of special effects for it, but I thought, I don't know, like have him stand in front of it and then do like an optical thing where maybe like the train stops. But there might have been other ways to do it. But just seeing him just literally rip up the track and then he leaves and there's like a fade to black. I'm like, oh, we didn't even see trains. We needed a little more. We just needed a little more. I don't know what. I guess you had no stock footage of a train stop. Is the problem. They didn't have the stock footage. He had a 30-minute window. He just got to. Yes, well, I mean, I mentioned Superman 4 slightly in jest, but like the reason that he did it that way in that movie is they had no budget. It's like, don't you want to see Superman like stop a train and have a cool thing and like a handprint on the? No, we don't have the budget for that. Have him just step on the track and add some little sparks, and that's what they did, and that's how he saved the day. We're not going to see this guy catching up to a train and like pulling it backwards. Like they didn't have the technology then. I get that, but I feel like they could have done something a little more than what they did here.
I agree. But all that being said, I still do appreciate the attempt because this was the kind of save like we hadn't seen before. So there's something to be said for that. I'll give them that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So back at the Daily Planet, Jimmy comes back. He still has the photo. He can't figure out why Clark was so quick to give it up. Clark says, well, he had a gun, and Clark figured he'd follow him. And again, Jimmy, like so clever, so savvy here, pushing back. And he's like, well, he also still has that photo of you. I mean, Superman.
Mm-hmm.
And as they're leaving, he says, I don't know which picture worries you most.
Yeah.
So
neither do I.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I know it's the one of him and Superman, frankly, but
I think, I don't know that you can really read this episode. Well, I mean, I don't know I think at this point, after the guy showing up with the gun and then the near subway crash, I would like to think at this point, Clark's priority is Bert and these guys, but I don't know. That's debatable, but definitely at the earlier point in this episode. Yeah. I don't think he was all that worried about the man with the tulips who ransacked the dark room.
And that doesn't upset me. I'm just like, that's just this version, and that's fine. Like that's cool. I like that. That doesn't make him a bad guy,
Yeah, no, for sure. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Many of you have already used this code, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you. This episode made possible in part by educator, hobby comic book collector, and pop culture enthusiast Sam Lim. Sam is based in the South Jersey area and is looking to connect with other comics fans as well as retailers. They're also looking for comic shops to explore, so recommendations are welcome. Be sure to follow Sam on Instagram at SZL Comics to see their latest comic pickups and shop adventures. So then we're in Henderson's office. So Clark calls him Bill a couple of times in this scene. According to IMDb trivia, I think this is the first time apparently he's identified as Bill. I don't remember from season 1. I mean, as much as we went through all these episodes, but I don't know offhand if his first name was given.
Man, I don't even remember the first name of any of the other Hendersons, that we see anywhere. Henderson on Lois and Clark, and even on Black Lightning. Right, that Henderson. I don't know his first name.
Oh, that's right. I only watched the pilot of that. Oh, that's a good point, though.
Good show.
But I love the actor and that take on the character. But yeah, I didn't keep up with it. But so in Bill's office, they're looking at the Mug Book, and Henderson.
Mug Book, go-to for 1950s police.
I know, and he IDs this guy as Bert the Tulip Burnside, but claims it can't be him. Right, it just can't be him because this guy is apparently dead. But then this is where that photograph really comes in handy, right?
Yeah. Well, right here, as you see, this can't be an old photo because he's standing in front of this limited engagement play that just started here in Metropolis, right?
Which, two things. I guess on the one hand, why? Like Henderson, I wish he were more competent. It's like, would you look at what's in front of you? But also, again, The Secret Life of Clark. He's plugged into the theater scene. It's like, what is this guy doing when he's not Superman and he's not at the office? He's got quite the robust nightlife.
Henderson, yeah, he's not. We'll give him some credit. He's not Chief O'Hara from Batman 66, but there are he's inconsistent in his ability to solve crimes. All based off how competent or incompetent they need the cops to be that week to help or hurt Superman, right?
Yeah, fair enough. But he explains, so once they figure out, okay, no, this guy's actually alive, talks about how this guy was a con man and is supposedly dead. There was a body found that was identified as his. It was, found in a hit and run. I love here how Henderson's going to get his guys on it, but Clark's like, no, let me handle it. It's like, okay. But Clark says, he's like, have I ever let you down before? Henderson goes along with it. And I love, again, Jimmy, once again, he's like, because Henderson gives him X amount of time, and Jimmy's like, it shouldn't take a man like Mr. Kent even that long. And Henderson gives him a little look like, what are you talking about? So I love these little digs from Jimmy throughout the episode.
No, that's good. That's good. No, Jimmy had some good stuff in here. And, I got to say, like, how old was Jack Larson during this? Do you know? Was he he a teenager in the first season?
No, he was in his 20s. I'm almost positive. Okay. I'd have to double check, but I'm pretty sure he was in his 20s.
Yeah. I just feel like he's like, I could tell like a couple of years have passed since the last, because he looked like a kid even, it's even in the first season. Like, and now he's like, okay, you look young, but you look like a young man now. Like, I don't know. There's that. Because we all, I don't know, you fill out a little more or something like that. Not, just an observation. It's just like he's less of that string being little kid, and now he's more of a more filled out man here. The second scene. I don't know if you've observed that watching these together, but
yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. I mean, it makes sense too. Like you were saying before about like how this film, the first season was filmed all up front, and then they, then they eventually found a sponsor and it started airing. But you've got a good amount of time between the filming of season 1 and the filming of season 2. So, yeah, maturing.
Well, I'm sure look at us from 19 to 23 or whatever. We look a little different too. So anyway, and for Jimmy, it's the most noticeable to me between the gap between the two seasons.
So back at the Daily Planet, Clark adds paragraph to Lois's article. This is now they're baiting Bert and his guys. He adds a paragraph to the article stating that Jimmy decided to mail Alan's photograph submission, baiting them into stealing a mail truck to get the photo back. And then this leads us to our climax here. We get, I think, another unnecessary scene of the bad guys deciding to all go together because Bert is like, I sleep late, you guys go. And they're like, no, this is a 3-man job. It's like, all right.
Yeah, just padding out time. I don't know.
But this next bit, I like this because they stop this mail truck and the mailman gets out. He's got a hat on, and I will be honest. I didn't clock that it was George Reeves at first.
No, I rewound this. Okay, so like to confirm, like I'm like, did they switch actors or something so that this mail truck comes up? That's a guy in a hat. All right, there's no tight shots. It's a medium shot. He leaves the mail truck, and then the villains pull up in their car and like start going through the stuff and then this mailman comes back. He's like, hey, what's the big idea here? And then the guys, the villains, they hit him on the back of the head with the gun. He falls to the ground and they shoot him. They shoot him in the back. I'm like, whoa, the show got hardcore again. I didn't think we killed people anymore in season 2. So for a second, I was like, wow, that's some edge to it. I can't believe they killed a mailman. Even the villains, like, you didn't have to shoot him. Like, yeah, you saw who we were. We got to go. And so they steal the mail and they leave. And then the corpse gets up and it's Superman. It's George Reeves. And I was like, that wasn't George Reeves, right? And then I rewind it and I'm like, oh, it was. Look at you, George Reeves.
Yeah, that was great. I love the way they pulled that off. It got us. So
yeah,
no, it was effective. It was very effective.
And another shirt rip almost.
Oh yes, that's right. I know.
And he undoes the shirt and or it's already undone. I don't know. And he shows the Superman ass. And that's something that, I think, I know people have talked about it. Like you don't see that on this show. You don't see him running down an alley, ripping open his shirt, but there's little moments, little sprinkles and episodes here or there is that in-betweenness between Clark and Superman. It's just fun to see. So I felt like we got a treat in this episode because we saw it in the picture and we saw it here.
I think, we'll get to this when we get to Panic in the Sky in a few episodes, not too far away actually. But I feel like, there are a lot of reasons why I think everyone kind of cites that as the pinnacle of this show. But I feel like even if it's just kind of subtle or subliminal, I think one of the appeals of that episode is seeing him in that in-between state. Because you're right, it's not something that you see. And it's kind of odd that you don't, because it's, we're not talking about a special effect here. Like, oh, we want to see him super spin and change. It's like, no. But like, when we see him running into the storage closet or down the alley, you see his back. It's like, we just want to see him from the other angle, ripping open the shirt. But so I think when you get to Panic in the Sky, like you see him in that mid state, I think that's part of why like it stands out so much, in addition to the high stakes, of course.
Yeah, I agree.
So then back at the hideout, the guys take out the mail bags and it turns out they're just, crumpled up newspapers. So they
bunch of newspapers. Yeah.
These guys are done with Bert. They're like, you're on your own, and they head out. But we don't see it, but Superman clearly nabs them. And then he's there in the hideout, and we see the like hole in the wall that he clearly just made as he was entering there.
Yeah.
And then we get this final showdown with Burt, where Burt tries to make a deal with him, right? Because like at this point in the episode, even though Clark had talked about, oh, isn't there a photo you might want to switch and this and that, like it hadn't been clear yet that Burt has this information about Clark being Superman. Now he really tries to leverage it.
Yeah, like they hadn't completely dropped that plot, but it had become so muddled and like we were talking off the top, convoluted. I was like, I kind of forgot that was like our objective here and all this. So this is a good confrontation between the two of them at the end, I thought.
And it's like game recognizes game, where Burt is like, I recognize a con when I see one, and so I really liked that. And Superman, of course, like I don't make deals, and that's when he uses his X. It's a good thing that safe wasn't lined with lead, because he's able to see through it and use what we again believe is X-ray vision to burn up the negative, so he doesn't have to worry about this.
For those of us who are young enough to remember going through an airport when film photography was prevalent, like if you put the wrong speed of film in the X-ray machine, it's going to destroy it. So you could, that's there is a vestige of real world logic here with using X-ray vision to destroy the film. So I'll follow that. It doesn't burst into flames or whatever. Like,
yeah, no, but that's true. And then
you're right about a con recognizing a con, though, right? It just makes you think of Lex in Smallville. It's the season 5 finale. He's like, you have this strong moral core, but you lie every day to everyone you know and everyone who loves you.
I know.
Lex has got a point, y'all.
I have thought about and quoted that line so many times. Like, so virtuous, yet you lie all the time.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating aspect of the character. These contradictions. We think of him as this pillar of truth and justice, but there is also this other side, and we are all reasons for why he would lie and hide and all of that. But yeah, there is a little bit of a dichotomy. Right? It makes it interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So Superman takes off. The police show up with Henderson and Jimmy, and then Clark arrives, and this is Burt's final gambit here. Now he's going to prove that Clark is Superman. And he pretends he drops something, and then he pulls a gun out of his ankle holster and fires at Clark.
Yeah, because Clark is like, oh, hey, I thought I'd missed this. Oh, hey, everybody, what's going on? Right? I'm like, oh, there he is. And then, come on, you're Henderson. You and your guys got to step it up, because you didn't frisk this guy. He's got an ankle gun here, and he shoots Clark at point blank range in front of all these people.
Yes.
To prove he's Superman, because he's seen that his evidence has now literally gone up in smoke.
And Clark, of course, is fine. And I wish this is a beat that I wish had been able to play out for like a little bit longer, of Jimmy and Henderson reacting to this. But Clark very quickly reveals the silver dollar in his pocket that he claims stopped the bullet. And that's seemingly enough to dissuade everyone of this notion. And they even kind of make light of it, about like, oh, how could Clark be Superman? And his last line is like, it isn't that funny. And he smiles, he breaks the fourth wall and smiles at the audience.
But then, Henderson's like, we like it just the way you are, Clark. I'm like, hey, that's the final melding of like what people's perception of him and how he actually is, and if they would or wouldn't think he's Superman. That's what I'm looking for on this show, because so many episodes you've talked about it, we've talked about it, we're like, you guys are talking about what a loser he is, and all he does is put his life in jeopardy and in harm's way and saving people, and the police are trusting him, and we got to get in touch with Clark. He'll go to save the day. Perry and Lois are always trying to call him to save the day, but they think he's some loser who's like afraid of everything. And I don't know, like this was a nice, like I liked this moment, right? And the only thing missing was him winking at the camera. They kept zooming in. I was waiting for him to wink. Because they haven't got to that point yet, where that becomes like the ending of these shows, right?
I know. It's just that we get that big smile though, which is great. Yeah, again, like I think we hit on this. It was kind of, I feel like again the rhythm of it was a little weird, and it went in a lot of directions. And the whole thread of the identity, I don't know. You can argue maybe it was better this way. They weren't beating you over the head with it. It was kind of more of an undercurrent, as opposed to that's what this whole thing is about, like the stolen costume. I don't know, but overall it was definitely entertaining, and it took a bunch of different turns. So out of 5 fedoras, how many would you give this one?
I would give it 2.5 fedoras, just right down the middle, like a solid episode. Like I guess I see missed opportunities here, that they could have gone in a certain way and they didn't, but like enjoyable, but also like, oh, come on guys, what is this? What is that? And honestly, man, I gotta tell you, like those literally, if you add up the screen time, 2 straight minutes of stock footage of the trains probably costed half a fedora for me, frankly.
Yeah. No, I'll go 3. I'll go a little bit higher. I'll go 3. Okay. But yeah, that's for all of the same reasons. And the lowest of it, which I think this is going to be a little bit of a roadblock for me as we're moving forward, because I know we're in this territory. But that was a bit lacking. But again, an entertaining episode. But yeah, we'll go 3 for that one.
Yeah.
Anything else that we didn't talk about that you wanted to?
Only thing I wanted to mention, again, the transition from season 1 to 2 is the title screens. I guess I just thought they would always have the Superman logo and the title and all that stuff. But the title screens, and I applaud them for having on-screen titles, right? They're still there, but they're just kind of over. Well, speaking of stock footage, they're usually over some stock footage of like LA or an airport or a prison or wherever we happen to be in our first scene. And I'm like, okay, I'm interested to see how that continues throughout the show. But that is one change. And in addition to them dropping another exciting episode of The Adventures of Superman, which I know you were disappointed by, but I've noticed, and have you noticed this on the DVDs? Like sometimes it's the season 1 intro, sometimes it's the season 2. You can tell from George Reeves season 2, he looks, speaking of people who look slightly older, he looks slightly older in that, but also the compositing is better, because in season 1 he's like half transparent out there on the moon or whatever, and on this he's like, they've actually like kind of matted him out correctly and he's not transparent. So that's how I can tell the difference between season 1 and 2, and I'm curious to see if there'll be those micro changes moving forward in the other seasons. So.
I know, and when we had Jim Nolt on, he talked about some of those inconsistencies and errors even on the DVD sets. It's one of those things where I know recently on social media, we were all celebrating the announcement of the 90s Flash series.
I am so hyped. Yes.
Restored, coming to Blu-ray. And it's one of those things where with Superman material and this in particular, it would be great to see, a new release or a restoration and where we do have these different cuts of episodes and different openings, like just to kind of have everything the way it should be. Would be nice to have like the definitive presentation of this. I don't know that we'll get it, but I don't know. We didn't think we'd see the Flash, so who knows?
That's true. And as I understand, they had to reassemble a lot of these episodes. Like there's 16 millimeter here, or this or that. And anyway, this is a monumental show, so it deserves to be restored to full HD if possible. I would rebuy it in a second if it came out on Blu-ray.
Oh, hands down, no doubt. So always hold on to Smallville. When people hear this, you'll have just completed your season 9 coverage, gearing up for season 10. Anything else you want to share with folks?
No, just follow us on social media at Always Smallville with 1S. We take a little hiatus as the show did in between seasons, so we'll be having some fun. We still keep the thing alive. We do Superman specials and whatnot, and it's an exciting time as Superman fans because we got animated shows, we got movies coming out soon, so always something to talk about. And it's hard to believe I only got one season left, and we're gonna make the most of it. It's gonna be bittersweet and surreal to end that episode by episode journey, but one season left, man.
Right on. Well, I can't wait to hear all of it, and I encourage everyone to check it out. I know with the Adventures of Superman fandom, there's a contingent of folks for whom George is Superman and this is the show and that's it. But for those who are interested or have been interested in other aspects of the mythology, I mean, Zach and I obviously are, massive fans of Smallville, and it's such a great presentation of the character. And we got to live with those versions for a decade, and there's so much to explore. So if you have any interest in Smallville, please check out the show.
I appreciate that.
Of course. So thank you, Zach. Thank you, audience. Always appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you come back next week for our next episode. And until then, remember, only Superman can do super things. Be sure to check out our sister podcast series, Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey, a weekly exploration of Superman's vast 85-year mythology, available wherever you get podcasts. Please join us on social media, become a patron, and subscribe, rate, and review today. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all.